For more on this story, I'm joined by our foreign affairs editor, Philip Turle. Hello there, Philip. 3 months on, even after the executions started recently, including one gruesome public hanging, we are not seeing the protesters be deterred.
No, there are certain groups of protesters who are going to carry on fighting as long as they can and protesting against the regime. There have been protests right away across the country, not just in Tehran, you can see on this map, but also 150 cities, 140 universities, and 31 provinces. So this really has been, since September, the greatest threat to the Iranian regime since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. And you can see from these figures how awful the situation is for those protesters. 2 executions, 18,200 arrests, 479 people killed, including 68 children. That has more than deterred the protesters. It's made them even more galvanized in their fight against the regime. The problem is that they are not being led by anyone in particular. This is a very sporadic meeting of heads on the street, protesters, demonstrators together. And that is probably one of the risks that they face, is fizzling out because they don't have a leader who is leading this fight against the regime. But there have been some quite surprising support coming from, for example, the former president Mohammad Khatami, who's called for the Islamic regime, the Iranian regime, to do the necessary to talk to the protesters and meet their demands. Remember also during the World Cup how the Iranian football players refused to sing the national anthem when they were told to do so during the opening of their first match. They face quite severe consequences for doing that. So that there are people who are supporting this. But at the moment, if you talk to supporters of the regime, they say the protests are over. But if you talk to those who are out in the streets, they say, well, we are going to carrying on as long as we can, because it's no longer a question of compromising with the regime. What we want is, we want this regime gone. They're corrupt, they are violent and brutal. We want a new page to be turned in Iran. We want a new form of government, and we will not stop protesting until this regime is gone.
And the regime does appear to be becoming even more brutal in recent weeks. Just in the last week, killing 2 protesters. The regime sees these executions as a show of strength, but the protesters see it as a point of weakness. Can you explain the disparity there?
This is a dicey game for the government. They have executed 2 people in the last week or so. One of them, the first picture we just saw, was hanged in public. This is quite rare in Iran, on a crane, and in both cases, both young men were only 23. Neither of them deserved to die as a result of protesting in the street. Been calls that they were given a sham trial without access to lawyers and then put to death very quickly afterwards. This is the regime saying, be careful, beware to the protesters, you could be next. This is an intimidation tactic by the regime to try to scare people from going out on the streets. Where we see a difference is that I think with people over a certain age, there's more reluctance to go out and protest, whereas young people in Iran feel more defiant about the regime between the ages of like 17 and 25. Many more of that age group going out and protesting, saying they're going to risk everything because they can't not go out and protest after so long. As far as the regime goes, that is the risk, because it may galvanize support even more. Now, what we're talking about here is not just a regime of mullahs. We're talking about more of a military regime, because the Islamic Revolutionary Guards are the ones who are clamping down on the protesters. They are under the control of the Iranian regime. They have been in existence since 1979. There are 50,000 conscripts. They have a budget of $6.9 billion every year, and they're already listed as a terrorist organization by Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the United States. And the problem is that if the regime were to fall, then the Islamic Revolutionary Guards would also fall, because they are there to support the regime. They are backed by the regime. Mohammad Khatami, the supreme leader, chooses the leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Therefore, they're working together on this. And that is the big risk for the protesters, that there could be a major crackdown and many more hangings to try to perturb them from going out on the streets.
Philip Turle, thank you so much for helping break down this story for us. Appreciate it.